Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome to the Arturia Synclavier-V tutorial series. Throughout the 1980s, the word Synclavier was effectively synonymous with unaffordable excellence. This device was absolutely at the top of the musical workstation world, far in advance of other synthesizers in production at the same time. And even today, it still sounds absolutely unbelievable. Over the course of this video series, we're going to pull it to pieces, figure out how it works, and see that there are lots of different synthesis engines that all combine together in a really idiosyncratic and beautiful way to make this amazing instrument. Hope you enjoy the series, and if you do, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to help support my channel. Today is going to be an introduction video. I'll give you a walkthrough of some of the main features of the synthesizer, including its architecture, in other words, how all of the various modules hang together. The instrument's got a few quirky terms, so we'll need to come to grips with what they mean, and I'll show you a couple of sounds and demonstrate some of the features. So without further ado, let's get underway. I've dialed up this preset called Aggressive Bass. I'm just going to play a single note now. What you're actually hearing there is three individual sound engines all combining together to make a single sound. That single sound, in Synclavier terms, is called a timbre. The three individual sound modules that are all combining together to make that timbre are called partials. Partials, in turn, can be constructed by stacking together modules called frames. So the frame is the smallest building block. We combine frames together to make partials, and we combine partials together to make the timbre. So it's a three-level hierarchy. In the primary interface, what you can see here, you only really have access to the highest level, the timbre. And that's why when we have a look on the left-hand side of the instrument, all of these knobs are headed with the word timbre settings. So these are overall changes that we can make to the entire synthesizer. Goes without saying what the volume is going to do. Similarly, pan is going to be pretty self-explanatory. You can double click on any of these controls to set them back to whatever their default happens to be. So the pan default is center point, but the volume default is minus 10 dB, or about 3 o'clock on the volume dial. We can also transpose, up and down, double click, reset it back to 0, which is no transposition. Now I'm going to stop at that point and describing each of the controls of this main interface. Today I really want to give you a flavour of how the instrument works, and in order to do that we're going to need to go into the configuration screens behind the scenes. There are two different methods of accessing the extended functionality. We can click the partial screen that gives you this top view. So this is really the kind of the authentic instrument-based view. This gives you the feel of what it was like to use a Synclavier. But actually every single function in this extended panel is also available in a different set of configuration options called Screen. If we press that button instead, I know it looks very intimidating. There is an awful lot of information. Like I said, this is an exceptionally powerful workstation. But if we break it down bit by bit, nothing is too complicated. And the advantage of using this perspective is that we get to see a lot of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes as these sounds play back. Okay, so let's have a think about this three-tier hierarchy. Remember I said timbre, partial, frame. At the timbre level, we're talking about the entire sound. We saw that in the main interface. Now we're looking at the partial level. As you can see down the left-hand side, one timbre can be comprised of up to 12 partials. You don't have to use all 12, but you have 12 sound generation engines available to you that combine together to make the timbre or full sound. At the moment, we're looking at partial number 1. So everything that you see on this screen here is partial number 1. And as we cycle through these partials, you'll see that they're configured differently. Let's concentrate on just partial 1 for now. I'm going to play a note on the keyboard. There's going to be a little purple circle that follows this horizontal line. Watch it. Here it is. That's tracking the current journey of this sound through time. We have a timeline that defines how this sound is going to evolve. These little circles represent the frames, so this is the lowest level building block. A frame is basically like a container that allows us to define a harmonic profile for the sound, including, as you can see in this window down here, the actual harmonics that will be used to generate that sound. Now in subsequent episodes of the series, we're going to have a look at each one of the functions in this screen. The engine page is probably the most important single page in the entire instrument. So let's just concentrate on the first 2 frames. Now, in typical Synclavier terminology, we don't have frames called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first frame is called basic partial, and then from that point onwards, we go up in frame numbers. So this is effectively frame 0 at the front of the cue, but it's called basic partial. And then 1, 2, 3. As I click on each of these circles, you can see the harmonic profile updating. Back to the first partial, or frame 0. I'm going to solo just partial 1 so that we're only hearing what we're seeing. Press the little S button on partial 1, play the note again. See these little purple lines? These are representing the evolution towards frame number 2. And as we go past frame number 2, we're going to evolve towards frame number 3, which looks like that. So you get a wonderful graphical representation of the evolution over time. You see the currently selected frame, but you also see the actual real-world harmonic content of the sound that's being generated at that time. So the frames are constantly cross-fading one into the other. This allows us to define exceptionally long evolution times in terms of minutes if you want to go that far. Just by pressing one note on the keyboard, you've got to constantly cross-fade between all of these frames. You can have up to 100 frames in a single partial. So at the moment you can see this entire timeline, there are 6 frames in it. You could add another 94, each one of which would have its own unique harmonic profile. Let's say you want to edit the 4th frame, which is obviously frame 3 because we start at 0. Well, what does that sound like? Every time I press a key, we go right back to the beginning and the sound evolves. But if I double click on the frame, now we get to basically solo that individual frame. And when I press a key, we only hear this profile. See, all of the other frames have been kind of grayed out. But hang on a minute, if I'm playing a single sound, watch the spectrum analyzer below, there's still evolution going on there. So there's something else that's acting on this sound beyond just the timeline. Let's come out of solo mode by double clicking on the frame again. See, all of the rest of the frames have been kind of reactivated. We jump over to the envelope tab. We're introduced to another concept of the synthesizer. Every single partial, each one of these 12 partials, has its own dedicated set of envelopes. The amplitude envelope describes the volume of the sound over time, and the harmonic envelope describes a process called frequency modulation. We're basically going to use a secondary wave called a modulator to modulate or change the primary wave, which in FM terms is called a carrier. I'm going to press this key again, and while we're in the envelope page, watch what happens between these 2 screens. Now, I don't know why the envelope shape is disappearing when I let the key go. As far as I'm concerned, I want to be able to see this envelope all the time. But for whatever reason, when you let the key go, the envelope shape disappears and you're just left with these nodes. You see these nodes in the background? Let's press the key and mess around with them and we'll see what's going on. That's frequency modulation. So the harmonic envelope describes the frequency modulation journey that's going to take place over the course of the entire partial. So this is in addition to the concept of the timeline that's defining how the frames will morph from one into the other. We have this master envelope that also describes an FM modulation. So there's multiple different kinds of modulation being applied to the waves simultaneously. That's what gives you depth of sound. Back over to the engine page. So that's what contribution partial 1 is making to the sound. Let's take partial 1 out of solo mode and have a look at partial 2 instead. This is a much simpler view. We only have a single frame. If I click the arrow, there's nothing to go to. There is no second frame, or frame 1 as it's called. And we've only got a single harmonic. The carrier is basically a sine wave. However, we have a modulator that's acting on the carrier, and it's very often the interaction between modulator and carrier that gives you your interesting sounds. Back over on the envelope tab. Ignore all of these other dots that are kind of cycling around and doing their own thing. You're getting this superimposed view of all of the partials that are being played here. But of course you can only hear the second partial because we're soloed. The second partial is operating over this extremely narrow time frame. The harmonic envelope, which is generating the tonal interest in this sound, is done after a very small period of time. See how quickly the envelope disappears to nothing. If I reintroduce some sustain, you'll hear what the frequency modulation is actually doing to this partial. So very briefly, we get this sound, and then it's snapping back to zero almost instantly. Frequency modulation is really, really powerful because it's basically altering the pitch of the carrier wave very quickly at audio rates, and it's not constrained to using simple wave shapes to do it either. In this particular case, the modulator is a simple wave shape. It's a single harmonic and it's a sine wave, but we could define a modulator of any complexity. Then this modulation is what would be applied to the carrier over time. Let's have a very quick demonstration of that. I'm going to take all of those extra harmonics away, back over to the envelope, give myself some extra sustain, and then reintroduce some modulation. So just to clarify, this wave shape is being used to modulate or change the pitch of carrier 1 at audio rates hundreds of times a second. You get this really unusual, very unique sound. Let's have a listen to partial 3. Again, we have a single carrier and a single modulator. What does the sound like? Okay, so this time we have a pad and it's still going. We have more interesting stuff going on for the first few seconds, and then it's kind of tailed away to more of a sine wave based affair. Let's jump over to the envelopes and have a look what's going on over here. So here's our harmonic decay. And at this point, when we reach 0, all of that kind of tonal interest is done. This is our primary journey. And then we basically settle down to playing the sine-based pad. So effectively, we're getting filter sweeps with frequency modulation. If you watch it in the spectrum analyzer, that's a filter sweep. That's a low-pass filter sweep. It's carving away all of these higher frequencies each time we play a note. I'll just go forwards and backwards through the preset list, get us back to the preset unedited. So now all 3 partials are playing again. We stack all of those partials together, play a single note, and now you can hear each one of those 3 partials contributing to the overall timbre. Examples are very often the best way to teach a thing. Let's try another one. I'm going to go into the lead folder now, and I'm going to choose a sound called Jolly Lead. Let's have a listen to it. And there's a very heavy delay on there. I'm not interested in the delay, so I'm going to turn it off for the purpose of demonstration. Just disable the delay. Back over to the screen we were on previously. That's the primary sound. Okay. How many partials are making up that sound? Well, the easiest way to see how many partials are being used is to jump over to the mixer. And now you can see, once again, we have 3 partials. Partials 1, 2, and 3 are being mixed together to make this overall sound. Let's do the same kind of thing. Jump over to the engine page and have a look at each of the partials in turn. So this partial is a sine wave carrier, simple sine wave modulator as well, and it sounds like... Again, it's frequency modulation that's being used to make it something slightly more interesting than a regular sine wave. In the mixer page, we can control that frequency modulation amount. We can modulate our frequency modulation. See the knob here, it's currently set to 0.128. That's me increasing the amount by which the modulator wave is being allowed to affect the carrier wave. Back over on the engine page, when we have a look at partial number 2, we see a brand new thing. Where are our harmonics? The Synclavier doesn't have to generate its sounds using additive harmonics. It can use samples instead. And in this particular case, we're playing a sample. Partial 2 is playing a sample. Sounds like that. It's called Analog Synth Bass. If we go into the browser, you'll see just how many samples come bundled with the device. You can also load your own waves in and have it play back as a dedicated sampler if you want to do that. But of course, having loaded the sampler into the Synclavier, we then have its generation engine with which to manipulate that sample. It's not just a case of playing the sample back, in its native form. So for this particular sound, this sample is done in 0.87 seconds. Just a very quick sound effect at the beginning of each note played. Here's its envelope, and you can see the sound fading away over time, the amplitude or volume of the sound. Just a quick point to mention about all of these scales. You can see that this scale seems to cap out at about 0.3. So how are we able to play a sample that's 0.8 seconds long in only 0.3 seconds of time? Pretty much everything in the Synclavier can be stretched. So there are multiple layers of modulation that can be applied to all of these settings to basically make them slow down or speed up. So if I play this note, that envelope's taking a second or thereabouts to actually complete. Let's play with the harmonic envelope for partial 2. There's me manipulating how much frequency modulation is being applied to the carrier. Good stuff. Over to the engine, and let's have a listen to partial number 3. Another sample. This time it's a pad-based sample, but when we listen to the sound, you have to listen carefully for this one. It's really quiet. It's just that tiny little sound. So when I hold the key down, you can see that this sample is basically looping. It's another feature you've got. We have loop facility. So why is the sample looping when we can't hear it? Because the envelope is overriding the default behavior. When we have a look at the envelope for this partial, we're going to have to zoom in because it's really small. The amplitude envelope is tiny. Here's the sustain point. Turn it up. That's what the sound actually sounds like. That's the pad pulsing. This is the sound. This is the sample that's being played. And it's the sustain level that's determining how much of it we're hearing. Let's have a play with the frequency modulation amount for this one. So just a little bit of manipulation of each of those 3 partials. We have a very different sound. That's about as much as one brain can be expected to handle on any given day. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit like. I'll see you for the next episode. Thanks very much.